Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe, and welcome to a video centered around the husband and father who murdered his family in order to live his life with another woman. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll that intro first. All right, so this is not the first video that I have done on the Chris Watts case. If you would like to have even more content centered around this case, please go check out the links in the description of this video. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on the police body cam footage of Chris Watts as he's interacting with the police shortly after he had done the heinous things to his family that he did. Again, if you want to see what that is, go check out the other videos. So during this video, I'm going to break down his nonverbal communication to see what sort of nonverbal indicators and tells were given off by Watts during this period that police may or may not have picked up on, but again, eventually led to his arrest in the future. I think that's enough of the backstory. Let's go ahead and actually just dive into this analysis.
Nothing on there.
What's that?
Nothing on there. You just have my camera. Truck up. Lay down.
Loaded my stuff up in my coolers, my water jugs, my book bag, my computers, some of the tools that I had from the toolbox. I knew I was going to have to do some pumping into rubbers today.
So during this time, there's not too much that Chris is giving off with his movements that is a bit of a red flag. And also, this is a little bit into the interactions that he's had with the law enforcement during this day. So we've got some context on either side to be able to work with. But even with this little blip that we're starting off with here, you could see the sheen of sweat that's on Chris's face. Now, that has a couple of obvious explanations. It could be if he were innocent. It could be, oh, I'm stressed. My family's missing. That's the storyline that was being presented at the time. Something along those lines causing somebody to sweat. It could also be centered around the fact that he's feeling nervous and anxious because he just did a terrible thing and now he's getting stressed that he might get caught out in that. And that line of thinking will continue to flourish throughout this body cam video, even so much so that the neighbor, who is not trained in nonverbal communication, he's not a law enforcement officer, he's just your average everyday guy, can even start to pick up on some of these behavioral anomalies that Chris is presenting at this time. Let's see him.
Well, it was also hard.
Is this on continually
Yep.
recording?
Yep. Well,
It's not. Is it motion or is it? Okay, so it's motion.
any motion event that happened, but I get cars driving from this street, And this is him at 517. Why would you follow?
All right, so during that time, you could obviously see that Chris is very focused on his phone. I'm not sure if this is an intentional ploy for him to seem less worried about what's happening here, as in case you haven't gathered even just from context here, they're looking at the security cam footage of the neighbor who is watching Chris Watts's house partially, the security camera is. So during this time, perhaps Chris is trying to seem overtly detached from the scenario that's going on here to indicate that he's not stressed about what may or may not be on that footage. However, to me, it also just stands out as interesting that he is so focused down on his phone during this period, because even if he were innocent in this point and he hadn't done the terrible things that he did, during this point, it would make more sense that he might be engaged with what's around. That also being said, to play devil's advocate for him there's also the distinct possibility that he was interacting with people on his phone about the scenario that's going on here. Now that the footage has actually started, you could see Chris start to put his phone away and kind of focus in here, and this is where things start to light up a little bit more.
We parked out there on the side. I just want to get everything in. These are still loading everything out there, all the tools that I had to bring in.
These are extremely overt nonverbal signals that he's giving now. So he starts to give an explanation to something which he's not really needed to. Nobody requested him to give that information. But nevertheless, he does still offer that information up, trying to be involved, something along those lines. But then what he does afterwards is much more revealing than I'm expecting he even anticipated. During the time of him even gesturing to the TV, you start to see him shift his body weight back and forth a little bit. That's nervous energy. He's just moving around. His limbic system is having some issues here, so he's moving around a fair bit. Then when you see him turn away, not only one is the sweat so clearly obvious across his face, but also you could see him take a pretty substantial breath in there. And I think he tries to mask it. He doesn't go the that you might expect it to be, but you see him take a breath in as he's turning away. And then he does a very overt venting behavior. Now, venting behaviors are done because of agitation in any realm of emotional states. It can be anger, it can be frustration, it can be sadness, it can be surprise, it can be stress, it can be anxiety, what have you. You'll see these venting behaviors come up because under here, you start to become warm. So oftentimes you'll see it much more small. It'll be a little movement off to the side. I like to call it chicken winging. As you see somebody start to do these little kind of movements, it oftentimes indicates that it's warmer under there. They need to ventilate, ergo the venting behaviors, and it's closely related to agitation. He goes so far as to not only vent, but he goes up into arms full overhead. This is a full amplification of the venting gesture and behavior. So with that in there, with the other things that are coupled in here, immediately those are red flags just in general as far as behavior goes. Now, what they're indicating is intense anxiety and stress centered around this area. Now, where that becomes more implicative and indicative of somebody's guilt in something is if that strays from other areas or from the general energy of the group, the general nonverbal communication of the group. If the rest of the group is doing very similar issues, oh, well, maybe it's just warm in the room and people are just feeling warm or high energy, what have you. But his stands out not only one from prior behaviors, but also from the rest of the group. And the environment is not encouraging of him to feel that level of warmth. So something else is triggering that in his mind. So this is likely something that the cops immediately picked up on as they were there, optimistically, if they had any form of nonverbal communication training, which oftentimes they do. So during that time, that would have been at least a little bit of a red flag for them. And those are kind of the contextual clues as to what's making it more of a red flag. This will continue to play out. So now as Watts is watching the screen, you could see him start to do some biting of his lips there. That's a sign of anxiety and agitation. He's feeling obviously stressed, and that starts to couple with the huge venting behaviors, the physiological response of the sweating, and then he's started back into this pacing, this shifting of weight back and forth. Again, another indicator of anxiety and stress. So this huge cluster of anxiety and stress is directed now towards exclusively the security camera footage, which is a massive red flag and was optimistically picked up on by law enforcement. During this time, you could see as Chris is kind of facing perpendicular to the body cam footage, you could see him trying to measure his breathing to calm himself down because he's feeling extremely agitated and he's doing everything that he can to not display that agitation nearly so overtly. But even in those attempts to try to wrestle down his agitation, it almost amplifies other avenues of it. And this highlights a lot of the issues around trying to pull off a successful lie in areas like this where there's so much intensity behind the weight of that lie, what happens, the consequences thereof. And so as he's trying to focus on one aspect of it, the rest of his nonverbal communication is still just oozing that he's feeling overtly anxious and stressed about this. And again, this is a hot point. He does have these moments of overt anxiety throughout this body cam footage and other body cam footages that do exist. And so this would be yet another area as he's trying to measure that breathing and pay attention to that. You see the rest of his body still continuing to do the rest as he can't concentrate on all of the different avenues that it requires you to concentrate on to pull off a successful lie or deceitful narrative in an area like this.
What else can I do with it?
My detective just showed up. So he'll probably want to talk to you. You'd probably, like I said, you might have you call like the bank and see if there's any kind of activity.
Because if there is any sort of action out
On his camera,
I would have got it.
Like
Right.
we had issues the other week when people were stealing stuff out of like garages and stuff like that. And I had parked my front.
I had to park right here.
Yeah. So someone,
See if
I could see when someone tried to jimmy with a flathead screwdriver.
Interesting. So now when he turns back towards the officer, he's still obviously maintaining the venting behavior that he was doing the entirety throughout this. But also, if you look at his eyes are fairly wide. That widening of the eyes is indicative of fear. It can be fear, surprise, anything along those lines. But seeing that in there, if you look at other areas where he's looking around at other people, they're a little bit more, his eyelids are a little bit more hooded. They're lowered. They're not as stressed. But when he looks back towards the officer, you see that they're pulled back just a little bit. That's a very subtle one. On top of that, the more overt one that he displays, the more overt expression that he displays is the very substantial and prolonged lip compression. Now, those lip compressions are oftentimes done very briefly. You'll see them like a kind of situation and then move on. But for him, he's sitting there with his lips compressed for a prolonged period. And in nonverbal communication, when you see lip compressions like that, anxiousness, anxiety, fear, and some negative emotion is oftentimes very closely related to that lip compression. It's centered around, as we're growing older, we learn that as we say things that shouldn't be said, we'll lip compress, and that can be a lie. That can be something like a secret. That could be just even speaking out in a public place where you shouldn't, something along those lines. The response is to compress your lip. Shouldn't have said that sort of thing. So seeing that come in there, that is centered around what he's perceiving on the screen here. He's feeling an over amount of stress. Then what he does after that, I find interesting, and again, is another indicator of overt stress that's being extremely poorly managed, is he starts to offer up information that nobody really wanted him to give. Again, this is the neighbor's security camera, and the neighbor is probably going to know the most about what goes on his security camera. However, Chris at this point wants to be able to fill in some space here and probably wants to feel like he's helping or adding to this investigation at the time. And so he starts talking about, oh, there was this one time that people were doing such and such and this and that, and it was caught on the security camera and all this stuff, and nobody asked him. And that's the biggest thing, is that he wasn't asked that question. He's just offering that up. And that is packing a narrative that nobody even asked him to start answering to begin with. So these signs of agitation are so blaringly obvious that at very least, in base stripped back, zero, nothing else, you can't look at any other evidence, the law enforcement at the time could look at that and be like, this person is acting overtly agitated in a scenario that does demand a level of agitation, but where the agitation spikes is more questionable. It's not centered around the entirety of the subject. It's not centered around talking about perhaps somebody breaking in. It's centered around the security camera and what the security camera may or may not have caught. And that, to me, would serve as a red flag, and it likely did serve as a red flag for law enforcement at the time as well. Let's continue.
Over there, and it was funny. But if any action would happen, any cars or anything left your house, I would
have gone like right in that area. This would fit. I mean,
oh, it'll pick up anything coming down the street this way.
where that turn right through? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Watch, I'll show you. There's nothing on.
Interesting. So Chris is trying to, again, he's offering too much information to the officer when the officer didn't ask. Again, it's the neighbor's camera. And so Chris is, oh, you could see all of this stuff and all of that and all of this. And the neighbor cuts in here and he's like, no, you can actually see further than that. I can see when people go down the road or they come up the road. And Chris is surprised by that. And he's like, oh, you can see that too. And what he does afterwards, again, is very interesting. He starts pacing again, another spike in that shifting of his weight from foot to foot. Anxiety, agitation is creeping up there very suddenly. Again, he breaks eye contact, looks down to the side while doing all of this. So that cluster, again, of agitation, it spikes from his baseline. During that time, again, centered around this concept of, maybe the security camera can see a little bit more than even Chris anticipated. It causes him intense agitation. Yet another red flag in just the police body cam footage.
At the mount here, we've like watched that one. But like, you'll see this car.
What's the pretty system you have?
Oh, you can see this car stuff right down the street.
Right one.
Oh, what? See what I'm saying? It picked up all the way down there.
He's next door.
Let me go.
I was talking about dispatcher. Heavy footfall.
Yeah, we can pick up cars from this way. I get anything coming this way at Big Turn. So, and usually it's night, I pick up the cars pulling the year trip. So, unless they pulled right here,
Yeah.
but I would have caught her walking out.
So many overt manipulators and self-soothing gestures during this time. Obviously, again, Chris is sweating profusely here. You could look at the neighbor, not sweating at all. I'm going to assume, just judging by the size of the house and the location that they were in, it's probably an air-conditioned house. So the sweating that Watts is kind of producing at this time is not. It's not usual and it's not expected. He's not somebody who has a medical condition that encourages him to sweat more in any scenario. This is his agitation showing up in a physiological way that he can't control. Nobody can really control how much they sweat. They could try to do everything to mitigate the sweating, but if sweat's going to happen, it's going to happen kind of whether or not you want it to. And so he's sweating pretty profusely, and you could see him do some dips in there. Again, he's feeling short of breath as he's trying to figure out, how do I measure my breathing here? And he's bending over, he's looking down, he's straightening up, he's tried putting his hands above his head, he's pacing back and forth. All of these agitation gestures are continually escalating as this security footage is being talked about. And again, it's not matching anybody else in the room that we're at least privy to, and it's not matching anybody that Chris is interacting with. So with that in mind, it's not that Chris is trying to mirror or is naturally mirroring the energy of the people around. His environment is not encouraging the sweating. These are all incongruencies with his behavior as to what the environment and the setting is encouraging, and that serves as a red flag non-verbally. He also does another of the pacing away. He breaks attention as soon as there's the opportunity for him to leave that situation. The officer, you could see him click in and talk to somebody on the radio. Chris was like, oh, do I need to go? Do I need to get out of here? As soon as I can get out of here, I want to do that. That's his immediate response. And that lets us know that he wants to escape that situation. He doesn't want to be there. This is very uncomfortable. He's found out the security camera footage captures more than he was expecting, and he's now likely extremely worried that it captured something more than he wanted it to in that morning time that he was doing all of these terrible things to his family. That's what we're seeing non-verbally. I would anticipate, again, that the law enforcement were picking up at least some of these signals at the time, even if they weren't something that they trained to pick up. It is still incongruencies in human behavior. These sorts of agitation spikes centered around these sorts of things kind of trigger most people to feel a little bit at least curious as to what's going on for that person. Why are they feeling so nervous? Why are they feeling so anxious centered around this? There's some contextual things that you could play devil's advocate for Watts during this, but they are insufficient for what he's displaying in regards to what's going on here. Yeah, sure, maybe he's stressed because his wife and kids are missing and things like that, but where they are showing up does not make sense, and the degree to which they're showing up in the areas that they are don't support that narrative. They support something a little bit more nefarious and sinister, which ends up being the truth, unfortunately. But these are some of the signals that were being displayed during the time.
Hazel. Here's good. Yeah, I thought nothing.
Nothing for the rest of the day.
No, that's it.
She's pregnant as well.
How far along?
14, 15 minutes.
That's a fascinating portion to me, and something that almost just seems as if the universe is saying, you know what, we've got you. To Watts at this point. Again, as in case you didn't hear that, sorry for the audio and the video quality. It's body cam footage. It's always going to be garbage. But during that time, he sees the footage of the womb and the baby, and then it's at that moment that he's like, oh, she's pregnant as well, which to me lets me know that his psychology is definitely elsewhere. He's stressed about something else. That my wife is pregnant would probably be a pretty high level descriptor of the wife's physical state if there wasn't something else going on. But it's only at this point during the security footage that Chris decides to be like, oh, also, I guess, she's also pregnant. And again, if you look at his eyes, the lids have pulled back again. That's again indicating a level of fear and stress or anxiety, something along those lines. And he's trying to break eye contact, walk around again. Another spike of this nonverbal communication then centered around the condition of his wife, which would only serve as another red flag during this scenario.
That's why her friend said it was low blood sugar.
And see, I've got her friend leaving out here at 2 in the morning. So my camera. Did you go check if anything was missing around your house?
It was like all the old planes and the
Can't make out a single word that they're saying here. I tried to clean up the audio so I could understand it a little bit more, reduce some of the background noises and bring out their voices a bit more. But because of how distorted and weird and muddy and messy the original audio was, it still doesn't make any sense. However, fortunately for us here on the channel, we don't necessarily need their words. They are beneficial. To look at all avenues of communication during this is only going to be beneficial for understanding. But since we're focusing on nonverbal communication, again, you could look at Chris and see the agitation continue to upwell. And in this area, he's starting to do more pacing. He's walked even further away and backed close in and further away and turning and shifting and again, constantly shifting weight. These are all indicative of a person who's feeling extremely uncomfortable, at least psychologically, in the scenario that they're in, which makes sense mostly for guilt in this area. In this area, this would be a point of we need to hone in and focus in if he's innocent. And he's just like, I need to figure out information. Let's look at this, looking closely at the cameras, doing everything that is possible to see any details. That attentiveness would be expected for somebody who's looking for somebody. For somebody who's not really actually looking for somebody on this footage, you might expect to see a lot more attempt to draw distance, which is what Chris is doing. He's regularly trying to draw as much distance between himself and the source of this footage, the TV screen, which is the source of the negative stimulant in this scenario. You see that regular drawing of distance. He obviously just can't leave, even though he asked earlier, you want me to go over to anywhere else other than here? No, I want you to stay here. But even if he's staying here, he's really trying to move away. And so seeing that sort of dynamic, again, is just yet another massive blaring red flag.
the phone flew.
Where'd he go there? Again, not really a need to go anywhere. He didn't leave. You didn't hear any doors open or shut. He just walked away for a while and then he eventually wanders back. But again, that's another indicator that he's not comfortable in the area that they're in, which I can only watered down play devil's advocate for. If he were stressed about his family missing, sure, I can get wanting to move around some, having some agitation and wanting to do something about it to an extent, but that's what they're doing here, is trying to do something about it. So then I immediately run into a brick wall of like, okay, if he were innocent, this is the point of where it matters. We're collecting the data, we're doing the investigation, we're trying to figure out what happened, and he's trying to draw distance between himself and that scenario. That's a problematic response. And it's not something that he's thinking of here, likely because he didn't do any form of training or studying or research on how to pull off a very convincing lie centered around an extremely intense psychological incident such as a murder. So he's only just oozing every form of nonverbal seepage that we can probably think of here to indicate that he's extremely and overtly agitated and stressed about what's going on here, which is an investigation. That's a red flag.
She dropped off at 1 point.
During this time, look at the difference between the neighbor and Chris and their nonverbal displays during this. The neighbor's feeling fairly stationary. You can kind of tell that the officer is holding fairly stationary as well, since the body cam footage isn't moving and shifting around. And so if two people in that room are fairly stationary and attentively watching the TV screen, there's only one person who's not, and that one person who's not has continually made attempts to get away from this scenario or offer unneeded, useless information, is surprised by things, and has only shown levels of agitation, stress, and anxiety centered around various important points of the security footage or information around that security footage. These are all exclusively red flags. It becomes quite clear as you watch through the footage of the Chris Watts file why he was caught so quickly. He did not do a good job at masking what he had done. He tried to do a good job, and in some areas he did pull off a good job, but even in those areas, it came across as an overcompensation. He was either overtly so extremely anxious like this that it came across as, this is suspicious, or it was the exact flip side of that coin to where he was like, oh man, you know what? This is the chillest day I've had in my life. I've never even had a problem before. And that's an overcompensation, which comes across again as suspicious. Naturally flowing, there would have been a balance between those two of agitation and then lack of like, I don't have anything to be worried about myself. They're not looking at me. And that balance would exist, but he doesn't have that balance because it didn't exist for him. He was exclusively guilty, and it showed up non-verbally extremely clearly. And again, he got caught so quickly because of, I'm sure, partially his non-verbal communication, but also if you've watched the other videos, because of a brilliantly done interrogation period as well.
She's that my doorbell said 148. Thing.
But this is perfectly at 140.
So as soon as it takes up motion, and like fail.
Okay. I thought you. And that was the start of the video?
Yep. Stop on 148 in the morning.
I didn't pick her up going into the house though.
It didn't.
Interesting thing, just to even make note of, that the officer did well. You didn't pick her up going into the house. She didn't. But you watch over at Chris here, and now he's hugging himself. This is extremely closed off nonverbal communication. Anytime you see closed nonverbal communication like that, you can at least start paying attention. It does not mean to disband some of the like misinformation out there. Seeing somebody cross their arms or fold their arms across does not mean that they're lying. It does not mean that they're being deceitful. And in fact, it doesn't even necessarily mean that they're feeling uncomfortable. What you want to pay attention to is the spikes in it and what they're related to understand a little bit better. So in this area, we haven't seen Chris just relaxing this way, nor does he give the energy or his posturing show that he is feeling relaxed. He's extremely closed in and tense. And that's different. That's different than just somebody, I don't know, I'm just sitting here. Many people will just cross their arms because it's the most comfortable way to do so, and it keeps their own body contained. So that's a natural response to any situation. But the way that Chris is doing it is very, very different than somebody who is just relaxedly crossing their arms. And that's where this, let's just black and white nonverbal communication tells becomes extremely dangerous, because crossed arms, black and whited, in this area, it's an indicator of guilt. It's an indicator of stress at very least. He's very anxious in this area, and he's closing himself off. He's doing a self-hug in this area. That's a self-soother as well. So in this area, that's a red flag. If you see somebody standing like that in an airport, for instance, and they're just waiting in line, that's not indicative of anything. That's just indicative of them standing there. So you have to have that context. You have to look at more than just the instant itself. And that's where an instance like this, the longer footage that we can have, the more exposure and more understanding as to their behavior throughout an entire scenario, rather than just one little clip, helps add accuracy and context to the tells that are being seen. Obviously, in this area, he's not relaxing. This sort of posturing and holding of your body is not relaxed. That's stressed, that's self-soothing, that's anxious, that's agitated. So he's feeling agitated in this area. And you could especially see it if you look down at his arm there. He's gripping his arm very, very tightly with his other hand, and that lets you know he's squeezing himself. This is agitation. This isn't relaxation. This is agitation. He's not feeling comfortable with this. And again, now this is spiked up in the area where they're starting to look for activity at the time that it's supposed to be looked at, and they're not really finding the activity that should be found there according to Watts's narrative, and his nonverbal communication is reflecting that that does not sit well with him. All of these are tells that you want to keep track of during instances like this to be able to get a more accurate nonverbal read.
And I usually pick him up when he comes walking through here. I pick him up. So it's not going to show he'll walk them into the house.
Before it shows anything here, notice how the neighbor brings up, and you could see up through here, you could see him walking through here. Oh boy. And boy, does Watts start shifting back and forth. His anxiety has again spiked, and still doing the self-hug that was there before, but now there's been more detail that has been added that Watts at this point knows could be indicative of his guilt. And so we start to see that anxiety and agitation crop up yet again, paying attention to when the spikes in nonverbal communication happen with the narrative that's being presented at the time is yet more context to add more clarity to what's going on behaviorally.
The shooter walked by me. That's all. That's okay. Yeah, yeah. They see all these people coming in. They're like, let's go.
Yeah.
It's so overt. It's so overt. So he's still doing the self-hugging at the beginning. You also see the shifting back and forth, all agitation, all anxiety. You also then see the lip compression, the prolonged lip compression come in there yet again, centered around this area. And then it's almost like he catches himself. He's like, oh man, I look way too stressed. Because he does. He's sweating. He's hugging himself. He's rocking back and forth. His lips are compressed. He looks so overtly stressed out by this scenario here that it's almost like he catches himself, and he does a number of manipulators. It's hard to say whether or not he's trying to fix his pockets or play off something along those lines. He does a number of manipulators down, and then he tries to shove his hands in his pockets. Yet again, though, if you look at the overall posturing of his body's frame, it's tense. He's not sitting there like, this is okay. He's tense. He's very, very stressed about this. And again, that only plays so far into innocence. A person would only be so stressed about this scenario in their innocence. They would want more action. They wouldn't want to just sit there and feel more and more stressed. So during this time, he's presenting so much more agitation and anxiousness centered around what's being perceived in the security cam footage than somebody who would be wanting to find out what happened during that security cam footage. Had his family been stolen away from his house during this time, he would be focused in on the footage that could possibly reveal that. But everything non-verbally from him is screaming for him to get away and separate himself from that footage. That's not a good sign for him. And sure enough, obviously, again, it wasn't a good sign in general for him. He was guilty. But non-verbally speaking, those are the indicators that show that he didn't perceive that as a source of possible hope. He perceived that security footage as a threat. His nonverbal communication only shows that.
Mm-hmm. How long does it typically record for?
30 seconds, I believe. But this is at 148, and then the next one I had. So no cars came through, because I guarantee with the headlights, it picks up the headlights. Oh, yeah.
And my business said that at 5:27, my garage door was left open. But I could have sent as well. It says it was shut during the day. But I think when Nikki's son, he may try to move the door around, maybe when they were trying to get in the drive door. And if I broke the laser there, because my alarms already going off.
Well, I know he said the front door he tried going in.
Okay, so as Chris is starting to add all of this extra information into this scenario here, it does again feel a little bit like packing of a narrative, anxious energy, trying to fill up space, things like that. But even in the middle of that, you also see him take a pretty substantial breath in the middle of his speaking, which lets us know that he's feeling somewhat nervous again centered around this area. At this point, they have been interacting around the security footage for, if we're going by just the body cam footage, 8 minutes at least. So optimistically, a lot of the anxiety that would just be centered around looking at a new source of information would have fizzled off a little bit. So the fact that the anxiety is still holding on at full force, enough so to make him interrupt himself to take a deep breath in the middle of a sentence, it's complex to say the least. And again, with him packing a narrative centered around that, it only adds more complexity to it, but it's not really pushing anybody down the avenue of everything's fine in this area. What would be more so the concern is that this person is behaving extremely abnormally during an area that it just does not line up with what they're trying to present. And that desynchronization or disconnection across the narratives as opposed to the behavioral displays is where things start to show up as red flags instead.
Tried going in, but you have to lock up.
That's
So that set it off, right?
Our remote on the outside doesn't work anymore. Got wet and the whole thing breaking on the rest of it. Yeah, that was it.
All right. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks.
Hopefully it comes up.
Okay, so again, Chris offers some unneeded information. Our remote got wet. The outdoor done blah, blah, blah. Nobody again asked. It doesn't really have too much to do with the scenario that's going on here. But Chris is feeling uncomfortable. And people who are feeling uncomfortable do not sit well with silences in persons that they're interacting with. That's an interrogation technique. That's an interview technique. If you ask a question and you get an insufficient answer or one that's just not satisfactory in general, sit silently. Let that person fill the uncomfortable silence. And so he's already immediately falling into that mode of thinking, I got to fill this silence that's going on here. Then he goes to shake hands with his neighbor. It's a very overt, intentional movement, shake hands. But what I'm paying attention to during that time are his eyes. He only very briefly meets his neighbor's eyes. He shakes hands and immediately diverts his eyes, looks down and heads off to the side. That diversion of eyes down onto the side like that is often indicative of shame, perhaps guilt, something along those lines. And so seeing that in there, that also is a red flag. Why is he feeling that need to divert his eyes so quickly from his neighbor who, if Chris Watts was innocent in this area, his neighbor is exclusively trying to help? Why would that sort of nonverbal display be present there? It's a red flag to be sure. And now we'll hear some stuff from the neighbor as Chris heads out.
Hopefully it comes up here. Yeah.
If you just want to go talk to him, I'm going to get his info real quick. No.
Back. Forward.
And I don't know if you heard that. The neighbor said he's not acting right. No, that rocking back and forth. Those are some of the very overt nonverbal tells that were present during the entirety of this body cam footage. But that's what I'm referring to, where the neighbor, who again, I'm assuming that it's just your average human being that doesn't care about nonverbal communication a bunch. He's not a law enforcement officer. He's not a detective. He's just wanting to be there and be helpful. Even he can pick up on those agitation tells, and they sit unwell with him. They sit as an unnatural display in response to what's going on here. So even at that point, he's picking up on something. So hopefully throughout this video, you were able to see how a person, even a person desperately trying to cover their tracks, desperately trying to pull off a deceitful narrative, a form of a lie, they cannot do so well if they're under intense pressure and if there are multiple avenues that are being paid attention to at the same time. If you listen to just Chris's words, maybe you'll be able to buy into what he's saying. If you listen to or pay attention to just an aspect of what he's doing non-verbally, maybe perhaps, oh, he's stressed, that's fine, something along those lines. If you pay attention to all of the avenues of nonverbal communication and verbal communication, it becomes so much more difficult for the person who's trying to be deceitful to maintain that lie. There are definitely people who are fantastic at lying. They have no issues with it. There's no psychological trigger of being like, ooh, this is stressful to me. And so they're able to more fluidly pull off deceit. That's not the case with everyone, and that was not the case with Chris Watts. So those are the nonverbal tells during the police body cam footage that could have and hopefully were picked up by the law enforcement at the time. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope maybe it was a little bit informative to you, especially in your day-to-day life, paying attention to some of these spikes and straying from a person's nonverbal communication around these instances of intense conflict or anything that might cause anxiety is important to understand and pay attention to. And the more you can understand about an individual, the more you can establish how they behave in various environments and scenarios, the better and more accurate your nonverbal communication reading will become. So that's my video today. I hope you enjoyed it, but without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome as you obviously are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.